by the effectiveness of meritocracy, right? I'm talking about whether education as an aspect of meritocracy, okay, as a driver of opportunity, right? Does it lead to lesser inequality? That, in essence, is what the question is asking you to think about. Okay? But there's a question modifier here. Okay? That will be the only. Right? So what is only? What does only imply? What sort of question modifier is this? Anyone wants to try? Right? It is an absolute, meaning that this takes an extreme viewpoint. And what happens when we are faced with an extreme viewpoint? Can we agree with it? No, right? We can't agree with an extreme viewpoint, right? Most of the time, you will want to disagree with it. Why? Because it doesn't consider the other perspective. Okay? So then the tricky part comes down to how exactly do you answer this question then? If you say that it is not true, what will your thesis statement be? Does anyone who has tried this question want to share what is your thesis statement for this question? Anyone wants to try? Anyone wants to check their answers? No, very shy. Everyone very shy. Anyone online wants to try? If not, I will just move on. Okay, think about it as this, okay? There are two ways to go about it. For first view, we can acknowledge the shortfalls of education. But also agree that it is unfair or unrealistic to generalize this observation to the entire population. There is one way that you can sort of agree with the conflict in the question, but at the same time not sounding very extreme. Okay? Alternatively, education has not led to greater inequality, but on the contrary, reduced inequality instead. Okay, and we'll see some statistics later on that actually show that this might be the possible case in Singapore, right? Of course, since your society question, we are talking about with response to Singapore. Okay, so what sort of shortfalls do we exactly have? Right, some examples could be um yeah, what do you need? Sorry, are you okay? Which subject for secondary? Okay, come, come. You give me a moment. Okay, so what shortfalls are there to education? Why does meritocracy not work 100% of the time? Why is it unrealistic to expect meritocracy to work all the time? What are some factors and some adjectives of Singaporean society that uh, make it so that meritocracy is not perfect? Right? Number one, you can talk about the dominance of family backgrounds. Right? These are the things like being affluent enough to attend private tuition, things like being affluent enough to build a proper study environment for your child, giving them enough parental attention and affection, being able to spend more time with your child, right? The kind of upbringing that they have, and the kind of connection that you can provide, right? There is also the decreasing need and value of a degree in today's world, right? And things that are out of your control, things like your innate skills and talent. So these are the things that education tries to make equal for everyone, right? Education tries to secure equal opportunity for all, but it doesn't work a lot of the time because of all these external factors. And because of that, education perpetuates greater inequality. Make the link between the two things. Make the link between the factors and the eventual outcome. Okay, it's very important that you do that. The factors and the eventual outcome. Okay, but then what are some good outcomes of education, right? Or what has been done to sort of try to neutralize all of these external considerations, right? We have your things like your educational reforms, right? For those that are interested, please take a look at Lawrence Wong's recent speeches. He makes a lot of references, especially when he talks to the media about education in Singapore, right? He talks about trying to level the playing field. There's a decreased emphasis on formal exams, for example. So things like your removal of your PSLE in Singapore. Things like your embracing different pathways for success, such as the ITE and poly route, right? What have they actually done for all of these people, right? PSTA top-ups, for example, increased financial support, things that they have done, offering more programs, for instance, that has led to people to at least reduce the stigma of people heading on this kind of pathways. Okay? Things like your financial aid, things like your uh, opportunities, even for disadvantaged people. Okay, like top ups to PSEA, bursaries, EduSave awards, things like that. Okay, and more recently, even the updated GEP program. I'm sure you all will have seen this in the news, right? Instead of separating out the GEP programs to attend selected schools, right? The GEP program will now be provided at all schools, things like that. Okay. Now I talked about the reduction of inequality earlier, right? Some statistics you can quote. Our Singapore's Gini coefficient, which is a measurement of Singapore's economic inequality. Okay, you all should have learned this in social studies if you all recall. Right, it has been decreasing ever since 2020. Right, it was 0.452 in 2020. 21 was 444. 437 in 22, and in 23, which is our latest, 433. Okay, statistics that you can quote. You have a question from online. How does decreasing need and value of degree relate to perpetuating inequality in SG? So if there is a decreasing need and value of the degree, what it means is that education itself, right, is not able to provide the required value for people to move between social ladders and social statuses. What I mean is that education is supposed to be a leveler. And if education itself is meant to be a leveler, what it means is that the further in terms of education that you go, the further right kind of success they are supposed to get, and therefore decreasing the inequality that is between people that are rich and people that are poor. Right? But because of the decrease in the need and values for degrees, just because you are good at studying and good at scoring the grades does not mean that you will become successful. And if it does not mean that you will become successful, then it is ineffective at making sure that there is a level playing ground for people that do not come from high prestige, high status households. Does that make sense? Okay. So we are talking about the effectiveness of education as a leveler of social status and income. Okay. Does that answer your question, Sammy? Hmm. Okay. Any other questions for question two? Right, quite a few people actually did question two. So any questions? No, no questions? Hamilton's. Uh, okay. Now we'll move on quickly to question three. Are youth of today brainwashed by social media? Okay. There's not much contention to this question except the difficult part. Okay, Evelyn has a general question. How long do we need to spend our time to plan out and brainstorm about the idea? Okay. A good gauge should be around 10 minutes. And why do I say 10 minutes? Because that is the most beneficial amount of time that you should spend to properly plan out an essay before you start writing out your essay and realizing that you didn't do something correctly. Either you didn't answer the question or your points don't make sense, you don't have enough points, the examples are wrong. Things like that, or you don't have enough examples for your points. Setting out about 10 to 15 minutes to properly plan your essay allows you to make sure that you have all the points and all of the examples that you need before setting out on an essay. And this goes also a very long way towards making sure that you answer the question well and in a structure that will gain you the maximum amount of language marks. Okay? So around 10 to 15 minutes to plan out and brainstorm about your essay would be a very good amount of time. Okay? Anything lesser, you might make a mistake. Anything more is you might not have enough time to write your essay lah. Okay? So that's the amount of time that you'll probably need. Okay? Now we talk about brainwash here. Brainwash is the main point of contention here, right? Depending on how you define it, there could be a multitude of ways to answer this question, right? Generally, we'll want to think about it as a form of mindset, right? Of course, with a negative connotation. Right? To influence youth in a negative manner, leading to a negative outcome. Okay, Ellie asked if I can scroll back to a notes for question 1. I will send the answers later, right? Soft copy after the class, so you can download it then. No, don't worry about that. Will get access to view the recording. Yes, I will send. I believe that the video recording will be uploaded online as well, so you can take a look at the video recording. Okay. So we are talking about the negative connotation of influencing youth in a negative manner, leading to a negative outcome, right? So we need to have an aspect of social media, an aspect or a characteristic that leads to a negative outcome, right? So what are some negative outcomes that we can think of, right? Number 1, mental health, right? This will definitely be the go-to point for most students. Think about your self-image distortion, things like your bullying, right? And poor role models. For the aspects, you can talk about influencers, right? Things like that, that eventually lead to mental health, right? Celebrities, influencers, things like that. Okay? You can talk about specific examples like influencers pushing unrealistic diets, right? Cosmetic products, encouraging teens to spend money, go for plastic surgery, things like that. I'm sure that you all will probably be more better accustomed to these kind of examples than I would be, right? Given that you all are probably more in touch with popular culture, so I won't spend that much time on this, right? Number 2, addiction, right? Things like your internet pornography, gambling, right? Things like your vices, smoking, vaping, right? All of these are shared by, for example, streamers, right? Even influencers to a certain extent, right? Even by friends, people who post their pictures on social media, right? And what are some negative outcomes? What about manipulation of identity? Right? Things like your political view and outlook. More prevalent in countries such as the US, right? We talk about people who are very influenced by the leftist movement, the rightist movement. To a certain extent, even when you talk about, let's say, the Palestine-Israel conflict, right? Those are things that political issues that social media has an influence over, right? And we talk about things like your algorithmic manipulation. How the social media algorithm changes your view on these kind of things or reinforces a certain view of these kind of things, right? Things like your filter bubble and your echo chamber. Bring in these terms of arts if you have already learned about media. By bringing these terms of art, show that you have an in-depth knowledge about media itself, about social media, right? And social media is supposed to be something that's very relatable, especially with people in your age group. Okay? To a certain extent, even things like your radicalization, right? You can talk about it, right? Almost literally brainwashing them, right? Local example for radicalization, something that happened very recently, right? I'm sure you all have heard about the two Roblox teenagers, right, who got self-radicalized on the online game Roblox. Okay, one was age 15 and one was age 16, right, who were self-radicalized through the online game Roblox. These are Singaporean teens, by the way, and then they were detained by the Internal Security Act. Radicalization means that they try to push or propagate extremist ideologies. Yes, question? Yes, you can talk about the features. So that is more of an outcome. So the features of social media will be that they use, for example, AI, right? Your search engines, your social media feed. They use artificial intelligence to push certain types of content to you based on your preferences that have already been recorded on the social media site itself. And what happens is that it leads to this thing called algorithmic manipulation, where they push content to you, knowing that you'll like the content. And what happens is that this reinforces your current beliefs because they are pushing the same content to you over and over again. So that is more of an outcome than a specific characterization, right? But the characterization itself will be the feature of AI and things like that. Okay. We even have things like your behaviors. So this goes under the negative behavior, negative outcome, I mean. Okay, things like your antisocial behavior, resulting in people called shut-ins. In Japanese culture, they are called hikikomori, right? Right. In American culture, they even have incels, right? People who live their entire life on the internet. They don't go out. They don't socialize, right? And because of that, they have very extreme beliefs, right? Mostly very sexual yeah, very sexual beliefs. Okay. And then also reckless behavior. Okay. Social media pushes people to do very reckless things for the clicks. Okay. Few years ago, I don't know if you all remember this. Few years ago, there was this teenager, very famous TikToker, that entered one of the zoo exhibits. I don't even remember. And then he went and then he did a backflip, right? I think in the yeah, it was in the rhino enclosure at the Singapore Zoo, right? So that's one of the things that people have been doing, stupid things online. to try and get clicks, right? Even if they are illegal things, right? For almost no benefit at all, other than to gain their 5 minutes of fame. Okay, things like that. Can? Any other questions for question 3? It's quite straightforward, but make sure that you set out the definition of what is brainwashed and what it connotes, right? And you must have the link between the characteristic of social media and the negative outcome. Okay? Don't worry if you cannot copy, I will pass you all the answer scheme later. Okay? Now, question 4, should governments intervene in the personal choices of individuals? The main thing I want you to take note of is that for a should question, right, it connotes a form of obligation or duty, right? And this form of obligation or duty can take usually 3 forms, either a legal duty, a moral duty, or an ethical duty. Okay, so always keep this in mind when you have a should question, think about the obligation and the duty. Alternatively, you can think about the desirability, meaning to undertake a cost-benefit analysis. Right? When you ask yourself, should I go to school? Should I attend a crash course that I signed up for? Right? You'll think to yourself, okay, I should go because I signed up for it. That may be an legal or an ethical obligation or even a moral obligation to yourself. But at the same time, you undertake a cost-benefit analysis in your head. You think about, oh, if I go to this class, will it benefit me? Right? That's why some people skip certain lessons in school, right? Their teachers aren't good. They will think about it. Actually, it might be more beneficial if I just take this time to revise my other classes and then they go for the class, right? And that's one way you can think about it, about a should question. Okay, either a desirability aspect or an obligation and duty aspect. Okay. Now, for a government question, always have recourse to the social contract theory. Don't be overwhelmed if you haven't thought about it or if you don't know what exactly is the social contract theory, right? The social contract theory, in essence, just means that there is this implied or unsaid agreement between the government and the citizens, right? That they each have their respective roles and responsibilities. Okay? You don't have to know very in-depth about it. It just means that the government owes a duty to the citizens, but the citizens also owe a duty to the government to do certain things. Right? So keep that in mind when we're talking about trying to balance the obligations of the governments against the obligations and the rights of the individual, particularly for this question. Okay? So when we're talking about personal choices, right, the clear conflict over here is whether the needs of the community come first or should the rights of the individual come first. And we usually look at it in a very rights based kind of analysis. What types of rights are there? Right? We have things like your bodily autonomy. Anyone want to guess what sort of a right? An example of a right that is a bodily autonomy. If you have autonomy of your body, what sort of right do you have? Anyone wants to hazard a guess? There's quite a few. No? Okay, things like your euthanasia, right? The right to die. Number 2, your gender or sexual orientation, right? The right to express your sexual orientation freely. Okay? Issues like obesity. Do I have the right to decide what I want to put into my mouth? Okay? Things like your pregnancy and your abortion. Do I have a right to abort a child if I don't want to give birth? Okay, even to things like your age of consent. At what age should I be taken, right, to be implied that I did not give consent because I'm not deemed to have the requisite knowledge. Okay, what about the legal age to consume alcohol? Things like that, right? Things that affect my own body, and therefore I should have the right to do these things, right? And we'll contrast some of these rights to the needs of the community later on and see why there is this conflict. Okay. Number two, right to privacy, right? Things like your location data, right? Very famous, of course, we all know about the debate with the Trace Together, right, back during COVID. Things like whether or not the government should have access to our location data, for example. Okay. What about the surveillance cameras that are installed everywhere around Singapore? Does the government have the right to monitor us? Okay. Then we have our freedom of expression. Right? Do we have the right to have free speech, to criticize the government? Right to association? Should we have the right to prescribe to certain forms of religions? Right? For example, do you know that you cannot be a Jehovah's Witness in Singapore, for example? Okay. Because why? They actually it's a belief of Jehovah's Witnesses that we shouldn't go to war, and this conflicts with Singapore's conscription model, right? Of males having to attend national service. Okay, things like your freedom of assembly, whether or not you should be allowed to gather and protest. Okay. Um, for some other rights in other countries, talk about the right to bear arms. Very controversial, right? Whether or not a citizen should have the right to hold firearms within his home, keep it on themselves in their vehicle, things like that. This is known as the Second Amendment rights in the US, right? And basically, when you think about these kind of rights, you should be thinking about human rights, right? Inalienable, sacred, sanctity human rights, okay? And we want to contrast them to certain needs of the community, right? Security and safety being one of them. This is why we are not allowed to assemble in certain places. We are only allowed to protest at certain places. Where can you legally protest in Singapore? Does anyone know where you can legally protest? Right, so you must get a permit and you can only legally protest at Hong Lim Park. Right, that's also where the annual Pink Dot, for example, is held, and other events. Okay, Pink Dot being one of the most prominent events. Right, to prevent offense. What does offense mean? Usually it means offense to people who are very conservative and traditional, right? We talk about this meaning to protect certain kinds of values, certain beliefs. So things like your should I say vulgarities, for example, right? Because that might offend certain people. Am I allowed to have tattoos and body piercings, right? Because that might offend certain people. Am I allowed to, let's say, be a naturalist or a nudist in society, right? Because that might offend certain people. It might offend certain religions, might offend certain spiritual practices. Okay? So things like your abortion could be one of those things, right? And that's why we have certain laws like censorship. Things like your media censorship. Okay, things like that. For the welfare of the community, right, to protect certain vulnerable populations, such as your fake news for elderly people, right? Or to maximize productivity. right? Things like making sure that all your citizens are healthy, right? That's why I talked about obesity. Whether or not you should be controlling what your citizens put into their mouth, because what happens is that they can enter the hospital, they can become unproductive members of society, right? And that's why certain countries have a sugar tax. That's why in Singapore we have the nutri-grade labels. Okay? Considerations like that. Okay? Essentially, we are thinking about whether, number one, there is a state overreach in implementing these policies, right? To the point where it becomes a nanny state. Or number two, is there any point in choosing a very liberal stance, right? So number one, the extent of the policies, and number two is the extent of the rights that you want to have, right? And there is this uh, conflict between the two. Okay? Any questions? No questions? Okay, I'll move to question 5 first. Sorry if we are rushing a bit. Okay. This was a very hard question, but those that do history will probably end up doing this question. If you have a history background, this question might be quite easy for you. Right? Is diplomacy the panacea to all conflict in our world today? Those that study science, you'll probably know what is panacea, right? It is a mythical all-cure potion, right? Meaning it's an analogy for solution, right? Is diplomacy the solution to all conflict in our world today? Okay? And of course, the controversy is between diplomacy and going to war, right? That is the two things that we are talking about. Okay? Of course, given that there is an absolute term here in all, you'll find that it's very hard to agree, right? And you'll probably disagree lah. Okay, so you need to have examples of both diplomacy and contrast it to how it might be a better alternative to war. Okay, then the second type of knowledge that you need to have is what sort of conflict is there in our world today? Anyone can give an example of modern day conflict? Anyone? Modern day conflict. Anyone? Examples of modern day conflict. Okay, someone said Israel Palestine, correct? That could be one. Anything else? General knowledge. Cannot think of anything else. Okay. The Syria war is still ongoing. You can talk about that. You can, of course, also talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. Yes, thank you, Ali. Ali also said Russia-Ukraine war, right? Um, Someone said Philippine Sea. I'll get to that. Okay, number four, the one closest to us, Myanmar Civil War. Right? Go and have a look up when all these wars started. Russia-Ukraine started in February 2014. The invasion is on 24th of February 2024. 2022, sorry. 2024 is too recent. Okay. Israel, Palestine, October 2023 until present, but can argue that it started earlier, right? Syria war was March of 2011 to the present. Myanmar Civil War started in May of 2021. Okay. Now, what about potential conflicts, right? Potential wars, lah, right? Because these are already conflicts. Now, someone talk about the Philippine Sea, right? That's definitely the tensions in the South China Sea. right? We'll talk about the countries that are involved. We have the People's Republic of China, the Republic of China, which is Taiwan, Brunei, Malaysia, Philippines, and even Vietnam. Lesser known, we have China-India tensions. Go and look up this thing called the Kra Land Bridge. This is a piece of railway infrastructure that was proposed to be built by Thailand, right? They actually wanted to dig an entire canal through Thailand that connects the two, that opens up the South Indian Sea. The issue with this is that there will be a direct line of connection between India and China, right? And therefore, there are tensions between the two. Okay, go and read up on this. Okay, I can talk also about the nuclear arms race, right? Iran, North Korea, Russia, right? US, and pretty much all of Europe are trying to amass nuclear power at the moment. Okay? Now, of course, overarching all of this is, of course, the US-China tensions, okay? Where they are talking about the Pacific Ocean. Okay? Now, diplomacy is quite easy to talk about, right? Diplomacy, you can talk about efforts between countries to sort of resolve their issues, right? Most prominently, you can talk about it in the context of the South China Sea tensions, where they went not only for an arbitration, but also a mediation over who the islands in the who the Spratly Islands actually belong to, right? But China actually rejected the result, saying that they do not accept the result as conclusive, for example. Okay. Ukraine-Russia war, UN tried to step in, right? Other countries also tried to step in by putting in sanctions, but didn't really work. UN, of course, tried to step in for the Israel-Palestine war as well, but that didn't work, right? Myanmar civil war, ASEAN still has not done anything yet. Okay? Things like your South China Sea tension, things like your China-India tensions, right? ASEAN has no power or ability to do anything. Okay? As a result, you can talk about how war might become inevitable for certain countries to have to protect themselves, or how diplomacy will always stay relevant for countries like Singapore who are unable to amass very strong military power. Okay? Any questions? This question will be rather example-centric because it does require you to have knowledge about the potential conflicts there are in the world today. Unless you're able to give examples of 3 to 4 international kinds of conflict, right? 3 to 4 different kinds of conflicts, you will not be able to score well for this question. Okay? So please take note of that. Okay, question 6 is an environment question. Rather popular, I guess, but not with everyone today. Okay. The main keyword here is the word still, right? Which assumes that the environment crisis could have been averted but not anymore due to countries' inaction. Okay, so if you agree to the question, you're also agreeing to the fact that the main root of this issue is countries' inaction. You cannot get away from it. The two are intricately linked if you agree in the question. Now, if you disagree, you can be agreeing that the crisis can still be averted in time, but not because of countries' inaction. Could be due to other things. Right? It depends on how you answer the question specifically. Okay? Now, it's a can or cannot question, which does mean that we're talking about how realistic or feasible is this. Right? Can obviously means that you can solve it. Right? Take a very optimistic view of things. Right? If you cannot, okay, you either take a very pessimistic view or a very realist view. Right? Acknowledge the reality that the global climate crisis cannot be averted in time. Right? Now, environmental climate crisis questions are one of the only few questions you can agree with an absolute. Okay? Meaning, if they ask a question like, can the global climate crisis ever be solved? It is perfectly reasonable to say yes, because there are enough examples and enough logical explanations to show why that is possible. Okay, so environmental questions are one of the only few questions. There are exceptions to the absolute question rule that we must always disagree with an absolute question. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, so this requires you to have a lot of in-depth technical knowledge. If you say that yes, the climate crisis can still be averted in time, you'll likely be quoting evidence such as from the IPCC, which says that swift and decisive action can solve the problem, but humanity is at a crossroads. Okay, you'll be quoting things like your energy revolution, not only renewable sources of energy, right? But also things like your electric vehicles, alternative sources of energy, clean energy, nuclear energy, as an alternative form, okay, of clean energy. Okay, talking about things like not under energy revolution, right? Geoengineering. The study that you can possibly cool the earth by injecting reflective particles into the upper atmosphere. Right? People who study physics may have read about it in their syllabus. Okay, scattering them so high that they reflect sunlight back into space, but it's still in the experimental stages because we don't know if there are any side effects of such a thing. Okay, what about if we take a very realist stance and talk about how, based on current trends, we are likely to exceed the 1.5 threshold. Now, for those who don't know anything about the 1.5 threshold, it just means that we need to keep global warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius, I think by 2026 or something like that. If not, the world will be far too warm and we are likely to escalate the global climate crisis. Currently, we have already warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius, right? Which means that we are actually not on track. Okay, certain other things need to be fulfilled for this to happen, right? Individuals and communities must embrace change, must adopt drastic change, right? Corporations need to start pulling their weight. right? Less developed countries must be given the budget to implement measures right, in major polluting countries, such as the US and China, must invoke drastic change. What drastic change? For example, phasing out fossil fuels. Okay, things like that. Ken, any questions? Those online, okay? Okay, we're running a bit over time, so I'm going a bit fast. So sorry about it. Okay, might overrun a bit today. Okay, question 7 is very popular. Should limits be placed on the development of artificial intelligence? Now, the number one trap, those who answer this question, did you answer it? Should limits be placed on artificial intelligence? Or do you answer it? Should limits be placed on the development of artificial intelligence? Right? The limits themselves are not on AI itself, okay, but the people developing it. If you answered it as limits should be placed on artificial intelligence, you will have written out of point and therefore failed the question. Okay, so always be careful when you're reading the question. Okay, now then what exactly is artificial intelligence? You can give your own definition of artificial intelligence. Usually it means the simulation of human intelligence. Right, via machines through things like machine learning. Now you might ask me what exactly is machine learning. Machine learning is where they give a AI model, right? Large bodies and large bodies of data, right? To learn from trends, learn from data, learn from information, to be able to simulate certain kinds of uh, human intelligence, human thinking. Okay? And once again, it's a should question, meaning we are looking at the moral, ethical, and legal obligations and the desirability of it. Okay, so always have recourse to these two when it's a should question. Okay. Now, when we talk about yes, if limits should be placed on the development of AI, we are usually thinking about ethical considerations. Things like your bias in data. When you chuck data into the AI for machine learning, right? What you are doing is that you are feeding it knowledge that you already know. You might have unconscious biases that you do not account for when you feed that data in. For example, if you have an AI that is supposed to sieve through thousands of CVs for an employment recruitment agency, right? If you feed it 300 CVs of white people, right, you might find that eventually your AI will start to begin rejecting CVs from black people. You might find that they are rejecting CVs from minority races because they are not white, because that is the data that is being fed to the machine, and it doesn't know. The machine is only able to simulate human intelligence based on the knowledge that is given. So number one is the bias in data, right? Number two, privacy concerns. When you feed it tons of data, where does this data come from? Usually it comes from people on the internet, right? Things like whether or not you actually knew that your data is being used for such a purpose, things like whether you knew that your data was being collected for this purpose, whether or not you accepted it, whether you knew about it, right? That is something that you can consider. Okay, privacy concerns. Um, and even then, after you collect the data and you build the AI, right, there might be concerns with um, the usage of it, right? For example, if you build a voice recognition software, when it collects data, right, do you actually consent to it, or do you agree to let it collect data all the time? Things like your voice recognition devices, your digital assistants like your Siri, Alexa on your phones, right? It's collecting data all the time. It's a privacy concern. Okay. What about legal concerns, right? There are some legal concerns about this as well. Primarily related to safety and security. The first one, vulnerabilities such as hacking. Are there enough safeguards in place to prevent hacking, prevent malware, right? Then there's also a need to regulate it. Why? To prevent malicious intent. People taking advantage and using this kind of models for nefarious and evil purposes, right? Things like your automated weapon targeting system that is being used in the military are forms of AI. And if there are vulnerabilities in these forms of AI and they are not taken into account during development, what happens is that a hacker, another country, or whoever can come in, use that missile targeting technology and basically implode your entire nation, right? Things like that. These are concerns that need to be taken care of and therefore be regulated at the development stage, right? Now, if you're talking about things like physical safety, right? Most common example, we have your autonomous vehicles, your self-driving cars, right? Are they able to make the correct judgment call when there are people on the street, right? Or will they just run the old person over? Will they run the old person over? Will they run over the young person? Or will they crash the car and kill you? Things like that. Yeah, someone online said deep fakes, things like that. Okay. Now, there are also economic considerations, a bit of a low-hanging fruit. Economic. Right, things like if the AI takes over simple tasks, will it lead to an exodus of jobs? Will it lead to people having their jobs being displaced? Right? Causing widespread unemployment. Right? Will it replace things that need to have a human element to it? Right? Can AI replace judges? Can AI replace politicians? Right? Can AIs replace teachers? Right? Questions like that. Okay, and if they can, what exactly are those implications? Okay, you need to tease all of that out when you're talking about this question. Okay, of course, on the other hand, you can think about it as if there are regulations, obviously, you'll stifle innovation. Very common point, stifling innovation and creativity. Right, things like placing limits will prevent further progress in development, right? On potentially life-changing technologies, like in healthcare, things like in your education, things in transportation, right? Healthcare AI models are becoming a very quick thing, right? We have things like expert systems, right? You can go and look it up. It's a specific category of AI trained to detect very specific symptoms or diseases, right? For example, tumor detection, things like that. And AI can be trained to detect that and to prevent human error. Okay. Number two, the limitations of regulations itself. AV is autonomous vehicles. Mini self driving cars. Okay. So regulations are inflexible, meaning maybe technology has developed to a point where your existing regulations are outdated. As you know, legislation is very slow to pass, right? All of these artificial limits that are being set, right, will only stifle progress, okay, making it hard to keep up, right? And all of this, you can talk about it becoming less competitive, right? Economic considerations, right? Becoming less competitive, companies moving overseas where there are more lax development laws, bringing their business along to other countries, right? Things like that, right? Also, there's also the concern of political overreach, right? Could politicians want to create certain form of legislation for their own benefit, right? Could they want to do it because they want to keep all of that information technology, all of that to themselves, for example? Okay, potential overreach, potential bias at play. Okay, considerations like that. Any questions? Those that did the question, any questions? No. Okay. Okay, now we quickly move to the last question. We're running out of time. Are mental health issues truly given adequate attention in your society? Now, mental health itself as a topic has become a very popular topic in recent years, right? And one that many people find comfortable writing about in the exam, right? Is usually an easy question to do. Okay? So prepare for this, keep it in your back pocket. Could be useful for you in the A-levels, your prelims, etc. Okay. Now it's an R question. These R questions actually call for evidence. So unless you have evidence and statistics, don't attempt this question at all. Okay. Now the word truly suggests that the statement is skeptical. It suggests that the current attention that is being paid is not sufficient. Right, I'm going to write MH issues. It stands for mental health issues. MH issues. Okay. Now then what does attention mean? Right, attention, of course, you can paraphrase it into things like support. Now, is there enough support? Is there enough awareness of mental health? Is there acceptance of mental health in your society or mental illness in your society? Okay. If you're interested, Lawrence Wong also gave a very lengthy speech recently. Okay, ever since that guy took over, he has been giving a lot of speeches. Okay. A very, very lengthy speech recently on the importance of mental health in Singapore. So be sure to search out his speech if you're interested to find out what um, he is proposing Singapore to better provide for people with mental health issues, right? Some of the things include things like expansion of mental health services, right? This is in schools, polyclinics, even up to 900 GPs. Okay. Increasing capacity of things like your IMH. increasing the number of public sector psychiatrists and psychologists, okay, and an increase in funding. Right, just for 2024 alone, we are spending about 10.4 million on this. Okay, and definitely more public awareness programs. Right, and yet there is still a persistent stigma on mental health in Singaporean society. Correct? Can attribute this, of course, to our Asian values, which prioritize resilience and self-help. Right? Asian society actually doesn't believe that depression exists, for example. Okay? Now, these two, right? There is still a shortage of mental health professionals. This leads to long waiting times, etc., etc. Okay, limited access to quality care. Okay, and the largest of all, high levels of underreporting. Right, which implies a lack of support for individuals with mental health issues. Right, could be due to financial issues, could be because they don't have any social support, family circle support, things like that. Okay, usually the last question of every paper one, okay, there will usually be one question that is not really within the main topics taught by schools, right? It could be something like mental health issues, very contemporary, very current affairs, right? Or it could be a very value-based kind of question, right? Is there value in honesty in this in your world today? Something like that. Or is there value in filial piety, things like that. Okay, so be prepared for those kind of questions, but also be prepared at the same time for those questions to not come out. Okay, so wildcard questions, but um, might be easy to do if you happen to possess very good knowledge about the topic that's being tested. Okay, I can give you a 5 minutes break. Those that want to go toilet can go toilet. Rest your hands a bit. I know you all wrote a lot. Okay, after this you'll move to paper two immediately. Okay. 3 hours is honestly not enough, but I'll try my best to really go through everything so that you all have a good idea of what to expect for exams. Okay. Now just a quick 5 minutes break. We'll come back at 53. For those online, are there any questions? Please let me know. Okay, for Ali, right? Don't worry about it as I'll be sending the answers. Actually, let me send the answers scheme now. Give me a moment. Please just give me a moment and I'll send the answer scheme into the group chat. No problem. Give me a while more while I'm marking attendance. Um, okay, for those online, I've sending the annotations to the chat so you can download them. Those that are physically here, I'll pass them to you in a bit. Okay, first we'll move to paper 2. So I want to take out the paper 2, right, which is the compre questions. Right, I will be flashing the answers, okay, by explaining them at the same time. Okay, so for the SAQ questions, please do your own marking. Okay, please take a look, see if the points you have. Okay, any paraphrases that you want to check are very welcome. Okay, please, if you have a paraphrase you want to check, please just raise your hand and let me know. Okay. So how I'll go about it is I'll talk about the question type first, and then my expectations for the question. Okay. Obviously, there are only 6 SAQ questions for this mock paper, which will not be sufficient. Okay, clearly there will be more types of questions that will come out for the exam now. Okay. For those that are interested, I'll be doing booster classes for the entire of September, where for the first 2 lessons, I'll be going through every single question type and doing question drills. So if you're interested, I'll be doing that for my booster classes, followed by AQ preparation and paper 1 prep. Okay, so that will be for September. If you're interested, you can always find out more on the website. I'll flash a QR code on the screen later on if you're interested. Okay, so for question 1, this is a very simple in terms of question requirements. Okay, literal question. Right, literal questions have 3 kinds. Usually they just ask for how, what, and why. And the term use your own words as far as possible basically requires you to paraphrase your answer from the answers that you have found in the passage. Okay? So if you see that you have a clue, their answer is in the passage and you need to find it from the passage itself. Okay? Now, in terms of lifting, what do you have to lift and what can you paraphrase? Sorry, Tombalik. What can you lift and what must you paraphrase? General rule of thumb is to paraphrase everything except for number 1, the theme of the passage. 2, what is in the question itself. And 3, common nouns. So what do I mean by the theme of the passage, right? So if you have your paper 2 with you, it will say something like the author talks about ageism in your society, for example. You don't have to find a paraphrase for ageism, right? Just an example. Let's say if the passage is about culture, you don't have to paraphrase culture. But if the passage asks for tradition, they are not the same thing. You have to paraphrase tradition. Example. Okay? Now, what are the penalties for lifting? If you lift the keyword, you get 0, even if you get the correct point. So that means you wasted your time. You may have spent 5-10 minutes trying to paraphrase a single point, and you get 0 because you lifted out for it. I mean 0 for that point now, right? So if you lifted out 1 point out of 3, you have 3 points, you will get 2 marks, for example. Okay? So lifting, please be very careful, especially for summary. I have students who can lift up to 5 to 6 words for summary and end up losing 5 to 6 points. And that means half your grade for summary is gone. Okay? Very, very serious lifting. And there is also a double penalty system in which if you lift the words, you will get lesser for your language score as well. So you must be very, very careful about lifting, particularly for summary questions. Okay? Now, what do I mean by you don't have to paraphrase things in the question? When they ask you why is using the term elderly to describe the older population not appropriate or innocuous, right? You can leave terms like elderly. You can leave terms like older population. Why? Because you are expected to answer a question directly. You can say something like, using the term elderly to describe the older population is blah, 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 and input your answer. That is perfectly fine to lift. Because you are expected to answer a question directly anyway. Okay? What do I mean by common nouns? You don't have to change things like the earth. You don't need to paraphrase things like the moon. Okay? If they ask you about the kind of things like the the moon, the sun, okay? Names, for example, you don't have to paraphrase them, okay? So take note of these three things. But always when in doubt, please paraphrase because like I said, the penalties for lifting are very, very, very serious, okay? Now this question, okay, I can foresee that most people might have gotten these 2 points, okay? In terms of the paraphrase, it's quite simple. Conjure, you can change it to paints, depicts, portrays, presents. Frailty and helplessness, you can always combine it into one word. Weak, vulnerable, something along that line, I'll accept it. Okay? The only key detail for this question is that your paraphrases must have a negative connotation. Why? Because the question specifically asks, why is the term not an appropriate term? If your paraphrase is neutral or positive, it defeats the purpose of the question. So you need to have a negative connotation for your paraphrases. I'll give an example later, right? Now, the second point reinforces negative stereotypes that isolate old people. Can talk about how it stigmatizes the older population as a divorced or disconnected or unimportant member of society. Right? What do I mean by a paraphrase that is neutral or positive? Let's say you decide to paraphrase it as elderly people are independent. Right? Clearly, that sounds like it fits the bill, right? Just because they are separate members of society, it might mean that they are independent. But that does not fulfill the requirements of the question because independent itself is a positive or neutral term. So you will not get the credit for that paraphrase. Right? Nuance and context is very important for paraphrasing questions. Okay, so please take note of that. Okay. Now, many people will probably have not paraphrased this point at the start. Okay, this goes to explain why exactly is not appropriate. Right? It sets the context for why it is not appropriate. Just because it has widespread use or acceptance does not mean that it is appropriate. That is one of the important points that the author wants you to pick up on. Okay? So if you have all 3 points, please give yourself 2 marks. Otherwise, if you only have 1 to 2 points, you're only getting 1 mark. Okay? I'll be passing to everyone the answer scheme later, so you can take it home and take a look. Okay? But for now, just let that sink in. Okay? Very simple paraphrase question. Now, question 2. What is the purpose of the use of brackets? So this is a punctuation question. Punctuation questions must always be answered in the form of 1, a function, and number 2, a context. If you only give 1, you're not getting the mark. If your pairing is incorrect or doesn't make sense, you also don't get a mark, right? For brackets, it's very obvious, okay? The point is always to make a side comment. You can call it making an aside, you can make it a comment, whatever, okay? There must be a point to making the comment. What is the author's intention? Right? The intention is important. Right? That is part of the function of why he uses the brackets. Okay? If you are saying that he is criticizing Stephen Colbert, okay, you must make sure you set out the proper context because he's making inappropriate jokes. If you're saying that it's highlighting something, okay, point out the thing that should be highlighted. Okay, over here is the characteristic that this guy is famous and renowned, and yet still makes the mistake of making jokes targeted at old people. So there must be a link between the two. What exactly, which feature is he trying to emphasize? Okay, which feature is he trying to emphasize? Actually, it might be easier if I give this out and y'all can make annotations to it. So let me just pass it out. Make your annotation on the answer sheet. Okay. For those online, I'll send it in now. Okay, feel free to make your annotations on it. Okay. If you're talking about highlighting or emphasizing, make a mental note that you must always be highlighting a specific thing. It doesn't make sense to highlight everything. In your own notes, do you highlight everything on your own notes? Then what are you exactly are you highlighting, right? You must always highlight something that is specific. Point out a specific characteristic of what you're emphasizing, what you're highlighting. If not, there's no point to saying that he's emphasizing something. Okay? What exactly is someone trying to clarify? Right? It must always be what is expected. Okay, I'm losing this in a very loose sense. Expected and what is the reality. Okay, there must always be a clarification of what is obvious and what is not obvious. You must state that contradiction. Okay, so if you have a correct function context pair, please give yourself 1 mark, but only if you pair it correctly. You will not get the mark if you don't state what's the exact point of the side comment. And number two, you will also not get the mark if your context is wrong. Okay? Now, why is the context important? Right? When you talk about the jokes targeted at old people perpetrating ageism, etc., etc., right? That's important because we are not going to give you marks for an answer that can be replicated for any other exam question, right? The presence of context is very important for GP. We need to set the context so that we know exactly what you're talking about. Why is he criticizing Stephen Colbert? Right? Is it because of certain things that he said? Right? Raise it up. Okay. Any questions? Any other functions that anyone has that wants to check? Anyone else that did the question and got another function? No? Yeah. Question 3. Suggest why ageism remains a widely accepted prejudice. Okay. Now, despite them saying that use your own words as far as possible, the word suggest means that a degree of inference might be necessary. Right? So that's why some people might found that this question might not be very easy. Right? Now, the first point, ageism defies political persuasion. Right? This just means your political beliefs. Right? And so the point that the author is trying to make is that despite having multiple differences, people can still come together and unite against old people. That's the gist of what he's trying to say. That is the point that you're supposed to infer. Okay? So this is the point that you're supposed to infer. Okay? The second point, picking on old people. Okay, wait, someone asked, could question 2 be to inject in reference for the context? To inject in reference for the context of late night show hosts. Or like to give an example, is it, Xingwei? Like to give an example of who might one of these late night show hosts be? If that is the case, then can. If you want to say that the brackets are to insert further context or certain, yes, to show who he's referring to, yes, you can. You can do that. Okay? Alternatively, I will accept the answer. Okay, number 2, picking on old people doesn't seem to stir the same type of outrage as insults about other social identities, right? You can paraphrase this in any way as you want, right? You need to infer a particular reason for this, right? Possible answers that I might accept. Maybe older people are just not very vocal about this, right? They are not activists, they are not social activists. They don't air their grievances on social media, or maybe they're out of touch with technology. If you're able to infer any kind of reason for this that seems logical, I will give you the mark, right? But of course, first you need to paraphrase the point. Okay, I won't be talking that much about the paraphrasing. unless there's something particular that I want to point out to you all. Okay. The words that are paraphrased there are suggestions only, but it's also a good source of vocab. If you are revising for the exams, you'll find that a lot of these paraphrases will commonly come out for exams. Things like outrage, right? When you have a media comprehension, when you have a sports comprehension, when you have a discrimination comprehension, you are bound to get a word like outrage, right? Pick up the vocab from here to attract or induce similar levels of anger, fury, rage, or indignation. Use it in your paper, right? Pick up those kind of vocab. Okay. Now the last one, the issue of ageism surged during the pandemic with the COVID-19 nickname boomer remover, right? Of course, this is a reference to the meme "Okay Boomer," right? I don't know if you all remember that, right? So I think to get the mark for this question, you will need to have an understanding of what does "Okay Boomer" connote, right? "Okay Boomer" clearly is a response, and what could that response be in reference to? Of course, it will be because older people criticize the younger generation doesn't resonate with that feedback or that comment, and then they reply, "Okay, boomer," right? So you can infer that there is a retaliatory response, right, towards the older generation's criticisms of or the condescending attitude towards the younger generation. Okay, take this question as a point exercise of what the author is saying and what point you can infer from it, right? Now, for example, this is an example. Correct? What is the point that the author is trying to make, right? Draw the connection between the two. Okay? This question is quite hard. Please take a look at it, reflect a bit, and always be prepared for a question in the exam that asks for suggest. Okay? If they are nice to you, they will say, they'll remove the use your own words as far as possible lah. Right? That's a very clear-cut way of knowing that you will need to use your knowledge from outside of the passage. Okay? For this, the context must be paraphrased from within the passage first before leading to a specific inference. So that's why this question is a bit higher level. Okay? So do not be discouraged if you don't get any marks for this question. It's meant to be hard. Okay? According to the author in paragraph 4, how can the society combat ageism? Now, how connotes that we are looking for a certain method, right? A certain way, right? Remember what I said at the start, literal questions, we are just looking for what, why, and how. Right? So this is also a very simple literal question. Just find the points and paraphrase it. There are 4 possible points here, but you need only 3 to get the full marks. Okay? 2 of them are somewhat inferred points. Okay? Obviously, the one that most people have obviously will be to adopt or endorse or to take up proper or more respectful phrasing when they refer to elderly people. Okay? Now, the second, you can talk about content producers taking the lead. Okay? Any of these paraphrases would be good. If you want, you can even talk about like, but take note, you cannot say things like people with influence lah. Okay? That would clearly be lifting. So this is an example of how you shouldn't be paraphrasing. Okay? As good role models. Okay? Or by setting good behaviors or good standards, things like that. Okay, paraphrase the idea if you are unable to find a word that can directly substitute what you are trying to paraphrase. Okay, look for the idea. Think about how you can express the idea in another way that conveys the same meaning. Okay, that's one way that you can think about it. Okay, the associations to the revisions to the Associated Press Style Guide and the drawing on guidance from the American Geriatric Society. These are also examples that you can infer points from. Okay, when you see an example in the exam, in the passage, always be careful to see if the example is talking about an earlier point. If it's talking about an earlier point, you don't need to paraphrase the example because they are talking about the same thing, right? But if he or she is just stating a general observation example, he or she may not have stated the point beforehand, therefore making it a point lah. Right? Bad writing, but journalism, right? So you need to be careful of whether or not an example can be a point or not a point. Okay? Now take note that the question asks for how. So how you can also give who lah. Okay, who can do whatever things. Okay, that is one way to answer this question. So possible ways to paraphrase it would be to say who can be the one to make these changes. Okay. Any question here? Any other paraphrases or points that you may have found? Don't have? Okay, if not, question 5. Okay, what point does the author demonstrate through her use of examples? Now, an example question is the same as any other kind of linguistic device question. Number one, you need the function of it, and number two, you need the context, right? For example questions, you first have to describe the example. Qingwei asked, for third point, could I have inferred it as news media altering their use of language? You can talk about it as a news media. But the altering their use of language seems a bit similar to the first point. So I'll be a bit careful with how you phrase it. Yeah. But you can refer it to news media. Okay, Qingwei? Okay. First, you need to describe the example. So for example, here clearly is a variety of examples. She uses 3 different kinds of pronouns or identities, social identities, right? All from different races, different kinds of identities, belongings. Okay. So to set this in context, what do I mean by describing an example, right? So let's say the author provides some forms of statistics or trends or data, right? Similar to how you'll answer a question in econs or some question in science. What you'll do is that you'll describe the trend in the data. So let's say if the paragraph states, um, so since 2019, the number of youths with mental health issues have increased by 59% in 2021, 62% in 2022, blah, 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 blah. How you describe it is that you'll probably describe it as a increasing trend, something like that, similar to how you describe it for your sciences or for your econs, similar topics. Okay. What I need to do is to condense the example down, factorize it into simplest form, and basically just describe it lah. And after that, basically to the point lor, right? How exactly does the use of this particular set of examples show a particular point? Okay. So long as you are able to show the capability or the acceptance of it, right? Capability as in the person doing it, the people using the terms, and the outcome meaning that people have begun to accept these terms. Okay, either or, you will get the mark for this question for the context. Okay. Any questions? No questions? Okay. Now, identify one way in which the last sentence of the final paragraph provides an effective ending to the author's argument. So this is what I like to call a conclusion question, right? Basically, number one, you need to link the specific device that's being used. Number two, to a function of the conclusion. Right? We have all definitely learned that there are certain reasons why you write a conclusion in a certain way, right? Clearly. So you will need to identify the particular device that's being used and how exactly does it further that purpose, right? So some generic examples of what the conclusion might be could be to make a call to action, could be to summarize the point. It could be to reinforce certain points. It could be clarifying certain points. For the device, I say, sorry, question for question 5. Teacher, what if for the device, I say the author is directly condemning them? Sorry, for question 5, question 6. Condemning them. You can, because you said directly condemning them. So the actual device that you're implying by saying that you're directly condemning them is yeah, sort of inferring that the author is speaking to the reader directly. So I'll give you the mark, but it's a bit of a benefit of doubt. If you want to do what you wrote, right? Meaning if you want to say that the author is directly condemning them, you can say the author reaches out to the reader directly to condemn them for their behavior. For example, that would be the device. Can, Jesslyn? Okay. 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 So these are some common devices. The use of humor. Alternatively, if you see someone using things like irony or sarcasm, please be sure to point it out specifically, right? What's irony? Does anyone know? Or what's sarcasm? Does anyone know how to figure it out? What's an irony and what's a sarcasm? Right. So all of these, if so long as the author is trying to make some sort of distinction between what's expected and what's reality, right? You'll see him using things like exclamation marks, right? Very emotive kind of language. You sort of know that there is a hint of sarcasm or a hint of irony. Okay. Pronouns is a very big thing that schools are increasingly testing. Okay. If the author makes a lot of references to you, to I, to we, for example, in the context of saying that we are in the same boat, or we have to face this problem together, particularly in like environment comprise, discrimination comprise, when you're facing a social issue, the author will repeatedly use the word we can do something, we can do this, we can do that, right? That could be something that you wish to highlight as a function in the final paragraph, right? Okay. Very commonly, students will talk about employing a call to action. Okay. A call to action to do what? You must always pair it with to encourage them to do certain things. The context is important, right? Just to say that the author employs a call to action and nothing more is not enough. Okay. You must always have the context of what the person is calling to action, right? A certain kind of behavior. Is he calling for a certain kind of change? Okay. Be sure to spell it out properly. What exactly is the call to change that the author wants them to do? Or what exactly is the certain kind of behavior that the author is trying to push for? In this case, it could be to adopt more inclusive pronouns, for example, more inclusive identities, more inclusive terms. Okay. The author could be raising a hypothetical or relatable scenario, okay, to allow the reader to visualize or to illustrate what could happen to him or her in the future. Variations of this that I would accept would be to intimidate the reader, to shock the reader, to inject fear into the reader that this might happen into the future, right? These are all implied meanings that, yeah, he's trying to use an example to scare you, okay? Things like that. I will also accept if you say something like the author adopts the most pessimistic viewpoint, right? That could be one way to paint the most negative picture to spur the reader to action. Okay. That is also something that I will accept. Okay. I will not accept if you say that the author comes full circle. Many students end up just writing this for every conclusion question. Not every essay question comes full circle. And if you want to state why it comes full circle, you must make the explicit reference to what came up in the introduction and what came up in the conclusion that links the two. Is it a similar example? He calls back to a story that he was talking about, an anecdote that he was sharing, something like that that links the two. You must draw the link between the introduction and the conclusion. If not, you won't get the mark. But over here, there is no such thing. There is no such linking between the introduction or the conclusion. So I will not accept full circle. Okay? Any other questions? Anyone has any other functions, devices that they want to check? No, nothing? Okay, can. Now for the summary, um, I will also leave you to mark it yourselves, okay? Most schools do this kind of point-based marking, meaning it's not like one very long sentence or one very long paragraph, you get like 1 point or something like that. Usually, if they are talking about different things, right, in separate parts of the sentence, each of those parts could be worth 1 point by itself, right? And then there's a further rubric for what exactly, how many points you need to get the full credit. Okay, so for this, there are 21 actually possible points, including a bonus point inside, an inference that you can make. And if you do make that inference or that possible paraphrase, you do get an additional point for that. And you will need 15 of them to get the full credit. Okay, lifting, like I said, will nullify whatever point that you were making. So please try not to make that mistake. Okay, I will allow the lift for elderly and youth. Okay, because it doesn't make sense to keep saying older people and younger people. It does not test anything. Okay, these two are also one of the key themes of the passage lah. It's always the comparison for passage 2 is the comparison between elderly and youth and the relationships that they make. So there's really no need to paraphrase these two phrases. Okay. Is there anything that I want to point out? Let me take a look. Yep, don't have, but okay, try to take a look at some of these words, okay, and pick up the necessary vocab lah. Okay, like over here when I say stronger, stable, and reliable, right? Things like reinforces would be a very good paraphrase. Okay, accumulation, right? Passages love to test consolidated, for example. Accumulation, amassing, you will need to make sure that you pick up the necessary vocab for that so you have an easier time in the exam. Okay. Now, Ali asks, where can we pick up the theme of the passage from and know which words need or need not be paraphrased? So you can always look to the, like right before your passage, right? There's like this little excerpt that says like this particular author talks about whatever things in society. Okay. And from there, you can pick up things that you may uh, feel like that you might not want to paraphrase. For example, for passage 2, it's very clear that you don't have to talk about intergenerational relationships. Number one, because it is set out in the question itself. So intergenerational relationships do not have to be paraphrased. Right? So as you can tell, I used it here. There is no need to paraphrase it. Okay? And when you talk about intergenerational relationships, you'll see that they continually use the term elderly and youth. For me, I see that there's no value in lifting it, and schools most likely will not see the value in lifting it as well, because those are very key terms and they are also considered nouns, right? And also because it's the theme of the passage. Please don't get me wrong, if you go into an exam and they ask you to paraphrase youth, you have to paraphrase youth. It's because youth is the key theme of this passage. That's why you don't have to paraphrase it. Okay? If you have a question that says youth do this, you have to paraphrase youth, okay, to younger people, younger generation. Okay? But it is the theme of this passage, youth and elderly. So you don't have to talk about it. Okay? I have to be clear on that. Okay? Don't later go back to school, then you tell the teacher, I went to this class, then the teacher say youth don't need paraphrase. Need. It's only because it's the theme of this passage. And if the theme itself specifically states that, let's say this author talks about youth in society, then you don't have to paraphrase it. Okay? Please be clear on that. Okay? Things like skills. Skills is important to pick up as a paraphrase. You can talk about techniques, right? That could be one way to paraphrase it, right? Connections, relationships, sponsors, things like that. Opportunities, very common word to test. right? Potential could be one way of paraphrasing it. Okay. Emotional also, one way you can paraphrase it is through psychological, for example, right? But over here, fulfillment itself connotes a form of emotional satisfaction. Okay, so it's a word for word paraphrase. Okay, things like that. Oh, review it. Take a look at the kind of vocab that you want to pick up. Okay, make a mental note of it so that you will have an easier time in the exam. Okay. For the connecting questions, okay, the only thing I really want to stress about the connecting question is that there's not really a fixed way or 100% correct way of doing it. Okay, please go with whatever your school is teaching you. If your school says that there's only one correct answer for the quote that you have to quote from passage 3, then follow what your school is teaching. Okay. To me, there are multiple things that you can pick up from passage 3 if you want to support or undermine a statement, so long as you justify it properly. If your explanation for the point that you pick up makes sense, I will give you the mark. Okay. Some passages clearly only have 1 point, some passages might have 2 or 3 lah. Okay, depending on it. But so long as you are able to identify why exactly it supports or undermines, I will give you the mark. Okay. So over here, you can talk about the contrast here. The author talks about how elderly are perceived as weak or feeble. And you can talk about how this sword lady is perceived as very strong. Right? That could be one way that you're talking about it. Of course, you have to highlight that it contradicts the general statement by showing that it is possible for an older person to be strong and also respected in society. In other words, they are criticizing that this might be a sweeping statement or of general application. And that is how the idea undermines the given quote. Okay? Anyone has identified a different point and wants to check? Anyone? Okay, if you want to check, you can always, if you're shy, you can always come and check with me later. Okay, if you don't want to share answer with the rest of the class, I understand. Okay? Come and check with me later, okay? Now the second one. Okay, wait. What do you mean by sweeping statement? Sweeping statement means to generalize a particular observation to everywhere in society. So if you are able to list a contradiction or a limitation of that statement, then you are able to undermine that statement. Can, Evelyn? Okay. Now for the next question, we are talking about the amassing of expertise and knowledge and imparting useful advice and guidance. This question should be quite easy. Obviously, the knowledge and guidance that she can impart will include things like you can talk about how it supports because it provides further elaboration, further example, further support for the point, right? That the sword granny is not only able to impart martial arts knowledge, but also other kinds of life skills, especially for young women and young girls. Okay, so you can talk about either the physical benefits of it, the physical skills, or you can even talk about the emotional mental skills. Both will net you the mark. Okay, even better if you summarize the two into one thing. Okay, provide value and help to younger generation. That's also fine. Okay, supporting questions are usually very similar, very easy, I mean. You're just looking for a similarity. Okay, you're looking for a similarity, a further elaboration, further support, further case studies, further data, further something. Okay, you're looking for further something. Whereas for an undermine question, you are looking for differences, you are looking for contradiction. Okay? In other words, this is basically just a very, very fancy similarity difference question. Okay? One exam tip that I can give. If you feel like you are not confident or you feel like there's not enough time, the connecting questions are only worth 4 marks and their marking scheme is as such. right? There are 3 steps, right, to answering a connecting question. If you get 1 to 2 of them correct, you get 1 mark. If you get 3 of them correct, you get 2 marks. So if you're ever running out of time, just paraphrase the code. You get 1 mark. That's how linear the answer scheme is for connecting questions, right? If you're unsure that if you're paraphrasing it correctly, then just look for an idea. Maybe the idea is correct. Paraphrase the idea. Okay, paraphrasing shouldn't take you too much time, especially since the ideas already came from passage 1, which you have read. Okay, and passage 3, which is usually extremely short, half page long at best. Okay, so if you're running out of time, you find that, oh, you know what, I might not be able to get the mark, the question is very hard. Okay, exam tip, just paraphrase the point. If you're not sure of how to answer it, move on. Try to find marks elsewhere. Because the second mark will take up a disproportionate amount of time for the kind of marks that they are given. Okay, some schools might have set 3-mark connecting questions. Those are even harder because the idea might be very abstract. Okay, for those, it's up to you whether or not you want to really give it a try. Okay, that one will be, each step will be 1 mark now because it's 3 marks now, right? The paraphrase, the identification of the idea and paraphrasing that, and step 3, the justification for it. So in terms of exam skills, okay, be sure to know where you can get the 1 mark, or whether or not you might want to spend the time, okay, going to AQ and trying to get more marks there. For example, if you are left with 20 minutes and you haven't touched any of the connecting question and the AQ, right? Spend 5 minutes, paraphrase the 2 quotes from the connecting question, get 2 marks. Okay, the remaining 10 minutes, move on to AQ. That is the exam tip that I can give you, right? GP is about time management more than anything else. 1.5 hours is extremely short. Okay, be sure to know where you can get the marks, where you can don't get the marks. Okay, exam skills and planning. Can? Okay, now AQ. Very first tip that I can give you. If you ever run out of time and you have 1 minute left to do the AQ, please take your stand. You get 1 mark for it. Okay? This applies for A levels as well. If you ever have no time, your time management is so bad that you, okay lah, I mean, if you forget, it's 35, right? So 23, if you can manage to get full 23 marks earlier, plus 1 mark, 24 out of 35, that's very good, you know. Make sure you get the 1 mark, okay, if you ever have no time for AQ. Make sure you at least state your stand to the question. Okay, even better, just write some paragraph, give some quote, talk about whether you agree or disagree, bring up some Singaporean characteristics. Okay, 2 to 3 marks, very simple. Okay, AQ is hard to score well. AQ is not that difficult to pass. Okay, make sure you capitalize on it. If you ever run out of time, play smart. Okay. Now, for AQ, I want to focus on just one thing, right? Number 1 is point selection. So 2 things. 1 is point selection. And 2 is the evaluation. Okay, actually 3 things. Number 3, I want to talk about balance. Okay. Now, number 1, point selection. I want everyone to take note that it's very, very important to plan your AQ if you want to score well for AQ. Always make sure that you choose a point that you can evaluate and you have examples for. Okay? Make sure that it's something that you can discuss easily in relation to Singapore and not some obscure point that maybe might be easy to discuss in theory, but hard to relate to Singapore society. Okay, that's number 1. Point selection is very important. You don't want to write halfway and then realize, hey, I don't know how to evaluate this. Hey, I don't know examples for this in Singaporean society. Then that's it. What are you going to do with the paragraph? Are you going to cancel it out? Are you going to give up on that paragraph? It's a waste of time. AQ, you only get 30 minutes best at best. Okay, spending 5 minutes to write a paragraph that has no use, that will not benefit you for your marks, is a very, very big waste of the time. Okay, so point selection, very, very important. Make sure, okay, while you're reading the paragraphs already, think about some points that you can readily evaluate for your AQ. Plan ahead. Okay. Number 2, evaluation. How do we evaluate AQ? Okay, we generally tend to evaluate AQ by highlighting certain characteristics of Singapore. Right, these are things that you know and love. Okay, very common if it's a passage on education. Things that should immediately come to mind: meritocracy, kiasu, tuition centers. These are all the things that should immediately come to mind. Okay, things like your 5 Cs, the materialistic mentality, high cost of living. These characteristics should immediately come to you for evaluation. Okay, for general themes like globalization, okay, things like Singapore thrives in a globalized environment, global trade. We are relying on global trade. We are reliant on imports and exports. We are reliant on foreign talent. Okay, things that should immediately come to mind, things that you can just throw at the AQ. Don't have to think that much, just throw. Okay, prepare a list of these kind of Singaporean characteristics, immediately throw it in. Okay, for my booster class on the third lesson, I'll be doing a gigantic mind map of all these Singaporean characteristics that we will just be throwing into the exam. Don't have to think so much, just throw, get marks. Okay, so things like that. If I were to apply it to this paper, for example, when we talk about ageism, our perception of elderly in Singapore, first thing they think of, Asian values, right? For AQ, first thing they think of, always Asian values. What Asian values are applicable here? Very clearly here, we are thinking about filial piety, right? Respect for elders. That is the number one thing that you should think about. Number two, what should you think about? Rapidly aging population. What are the consequences for Singapore when we have rapidly aging population? The younger people have to spend more money to support the elderly aging population, which means higher taxes, higher cost of living, greater burden, things that perpetuate ageism in our society, right? The differences in traditional views versus modern views. I'm sure that you have elderly people at home, you have met elderly people, even your teachers, like some of them are elderly, right? I'm sure that when you do your PW, you tell them about this idea, they tell you about this idea, confirm there are some differences in the thinking. And that leads to ageism. You confirm, ask your teacher, hey, why you say my idea not good? And then she's just like, oh, blah, blah, blah. You're like, okay, you're just an old person. Right? Things like that. The mismatch of views in society should immediately come to mind. The differences in values and beliefs. Elderly people subscribe to traditional beliefs and practices. Young people, not so much. Right? Things like your marriage, parenthood. Right? Things like gender. These are things that elderly people and Singapore and younger generation people have a mismatch and disagree with. Things that should come immediately to mind when you talk about AQ. Okay, things that immediately, you take a point, immediately start to evaluate it. Okay, then examples will come in. Filial piety, we have Maintenance of Parents Act, right? Legislation that's being done, right? The stigma of putting your parents into old folks' home, right? That is still very, very prevalent in society. Examples like that, observations that you know of, immediately put into the AQ. Immediately evaluate it, immediately get the marks. Okay? Things like our race, religion, value system. Singapore is multicultural value system. We have multiple value systems, and yet they all converge at one thing: filial piety. Okay, immediately use that to evaluate. Okay, so these are some of the things that I'm talking about. Right. For the second point, obviously, if you happen to have some sort of example in mind, right? This depends on how well read you are, right? Even generic examples might suffice. Things like them building community centers below HDB blocks, right? Intergenerational childcare centers where they care for both the elderly and young people, toddlers, children, right? And then they play together. Things like your playground. Why exactly is your HDB built next to the hawker center? Why is your HDB built next to the community center? Right? Why exactly is there this co-sharing, co-living arrangement? Right? These are all the things that immediately must come to mind when you're talking about elderly people in Singapore. Okay, retirement age, re-employment age, okay, intergenerational mentoring. Okay, things that immediately come to mind, just throw in only. Okay, so I've also put in this website at the bottom. Okay, please feel free to go over to it. It's the MOH website, but it provides a lot of resources talking about elderly and also youth and how they can help each other. So please feel free to go and read it. I think it's very useful, not just for this AQ, but also if you're attempting a U for elderly question in the exam. Okay. Now, number 3, the last thing I want to talk about for AQ, balance. Okay. If you have the time, please make sure that you balance your points well, because you cannot score more than a band 2 if you do not provide balance in your answers, right? This means treating all the passages fairly. Okay, listen up, very important. Always try to achieve balance in your AQ answer. Number 1, that means stating that you largely agree or disagree to a point. And number 2, that means agreeing with one author and disagreeing with another author. Okay, if you do that, you're able to score higher grades because you're treating all the authors very fairly, right? In AQ, we are not looking for a one-sided answer. AQ, we are looking for an answer that shares views from both sides. So balance is very, very important, right? If you go and look at your school's rubric for AQ marking, every school's rubric for AQ marking is the same. To score anything higher than a band 2, you need to have balance, okay? Within the paragraph, by stating that you largely agree or disagree, and in your whole answer altogether, which is 1 agree and 1 disagree. Okay, always follow that rubric. 1 agree, 1 disagree. And in those paragraphs, I largely agree, I largely disagree. Okay. Some students might also ask, is there a need to write introduction and conclusion? Introduction, most important thing, answer the question. If the question asks, to what extent do you agree with the various authors' views? Answer it directly. I agree to a large extent with the author's views. Or I agree with a large extent to the author in passage 1's views, and disagree to a large extent to the author in passage 2 views. The thesis statement and the stand is the most important part of the introduction. You don't need to spend any much time crafting a very good introduction unless you're aiming for full marks. There is not much value in them. Okay? Now, conclusion, you can choose to write, you can choose to don't write. My preference is that you do. Most students actually don't get there because of time management. But if you do have the time to write a conclusion, right, just sum up your stand again and the various arguments. Try to draw a link between the 2 arguments that you have made. Why exactly do you agree with one point? Why exactly do you disagree with the other point? Is there a reason? Is it because of a similar factor in Singaporean society? Highlight it. Right? Is it due to a peculiar circumstance of Singapore society? Highlight that. Right? Is it because of certain reasons? Or is it because there are certain limitations, certain reality aspects to it? Okay. Now with that, I will be taking any questions that anyone might have. Okay, any questions? In the meantime, please help me do a survey because my job depends on your survey. Sorry, I also hate making people do surveys, but please do the survey and you can collect a free foolscap pad on your way out if you want. Okay. Please leave good review. My 铁饭碗 is in your hands. Okay. Meanwhile, I will pass everyone the for it. The answers for the essay, at least the essay outline. Sorry, my name is Jia. I didn't introduce myself. If you're interested to know a little bit more about me, I used to be a practicing lawyer. Well, I entered teaching. I graduated from my coding program. And then I switched to teaching not long ago. So if you're also interested in finding out more, can also come and put me in. Okay, so my name is Jia Le. Qingwei, I've sent the notes earlier that you may have missed it. Let me just send it over again. I'll answer Evelyn's question in a bit. So Qingwei, I'll send it over again in the Zoom chat. You check if you received it, then let me know if you did. Okay. Okay, so Evelyn asked, for paper one, do we focus on certain themes or topics or just revise in general? I would suggest for JC1 to focus on 2 to 3 topics that you are relatively comfortable with. Okay. For A levels, you should be going in with knowledge on everything. Okay. But for JC1 promos, please focus on 2 or 3 topics that your school has already covered. Right. Focus on those. Make sure that you have the examples on hand, the points on hand. Okay. Please don't study for parts of a topic. Meaning, let's say if you study for media, don't just study social media, right? Focus on not just social media, also the role of influencers, maybe regulations on social media, fake news, things like that. Branch out, make sure that it's wider, okay, to make sure that you cover everything, right? Because the worst thing is to enter an exam and realizing that the topic that you study for, the subtopic didn't come out, right? That is the worst thing that you can expect, okay? So focus on 2 or 3 topics, but make sure that you go in depth into that. Okay? Evelyn got it? Qingwei also, do you manage to download them? Qingwei, you good? Hey, you haven't received. Hey, but I sent it to the general chat. You can't see it, is it? Um, maybe I will. Okay, I tell you what, I will put it into a Google Drive for the moment. Mm. Actually, if you don't mind, you can PM me. You can direct message me your WhatsApp number. I'll just WhatsApp it to you. Is it okay? Okay, no problem. Okay, anyone else have any questions? If you are shy to ask, you can come up and ask if you want. Okay? If not, then y'all are free to go. Okay? Hope today's class has been useful. No problem. Thank you too, Sammy. No problem, Jessie. Jeria also, thank you. No problem. Thanks, Landon. Thanks, Lee. No problem, Tasani. Yeah. No, no problem. Okay, you want more number? If you want for, why don't I give you my number? You can take it. Very good. Uh, no problem. Oh, there you go. No problem. No problem. Later. Bye. Bye. That's why you want a balance one. I will better. Okay. How do I balance one? Balance for AQ number one, if you just agree disagree. So you agree with one factor and disagree. So because usually how the complaint works is that we have three passages. One usually they'll say, oh, benefit of one will say, oh, there are some source, something more. So usually if you have a stand, you will try to agree one and disagree with the other. Because you agree that party views and change. Yeah. So it actually falls into place as well. Yeah. So as long as you have that, so it's fine. Two is fine. If you want to go for three, you can. Yeah, if you want to go for three paragraph, can. But actually, I find it right. Focus on two, do very. Okay, so maybe they are. And then for me, I'm gonna. Yeah. ช่วยแม่ได้เลย Yeah, you 哎，你不打小，and the pictures are by and you okay. So let's about the point is huh? Uh, when someone who asks them, then it's like, well, yeah, okay, apart from my, you didn't have one, is it? Okay, yes, please take. Sorry. Then actually, I think you started that question from the local now, single file. Then I will cut the comment. You all don't mind then, so, then I need to go out. Okay. Right. We'll move up to another classroom now, because there will be another crash course here soon. So you just take up your thing. Sorry, Evelyn. Oh, Qingwei, thank you. That's so cute. Evelyn, will the recording be uploaded on YouTube? Yes, it will be. Unfortunately, I started the recording a bit late, so I think question one will be cut off. But I will try to see if I can do anything for that. For balance EQ, that I agree one passage and disagree to another passage. Yes, you are correct. You just need to agree to one passage and disagree to another. Oh, bye-bye. No problem, bye-bye. Yes, Evelyn, you're correct. But also make sure that for the answers to each paragraph, right? Each paragraph that you write for the AQ, make sure that you do largely agree and largely disagree also. The largely is important, the qualifier largely. Okay? Make sure you take note of those two things. One. Yes, you qualify the agree. To make sure, because when you say agree, it just means like one position. You say largely you qualify a bit. There's a bit of wiggle room, so to say. Bye. No problem. Bye. Yes, there's dustbin there. At the back. No, yeah, no, both has to be largely agree and largely disagree. Because they are agreeing to the specific point or disagreeing to the specific point. Just because you largely agree to one point doesn't mean that the other one will just be a complete disagree. You get what I mean? Like just because you agree that there is ageism in society, largely agree that there is ageism in society, might not mean that the government is not doing enough things to prevent ageism, for example. The points could be very distinct. You get what I mean, Evelyn? Yes, you are correct. So just make sure that you put largely agree and disagree. It'll be fine. No problem. Any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Okay? Yeah, no problem. If you need my number or anything, you can always reach out to HR lah. Just tell them that you want to have a consult with me. Can? Yeah.
SC, right?
Yeah.
For balance, we need to do like each paragraph with like for every no you can for every paragraph you do a rebuttal for every single paragraph.
Can. Actually, that's what I also want to suggest, but some schools don't follow that. That's why I stopped telling everyone that they should do that. Because some schools they find it a bit jarring to that. So what I tell the more commonplace strategy is just to one agree, one disagree. So what you want to do to achieve balance can also be to you can agree two paragraphs, for example. But after that you rebut. There's also balance. No problem, bye bye. Yeah, there's also balance. So if that's what your school has taught you, that's a good way. But some schools I don't know why are they don't subscribe. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah,
Okay, no problem.
thank you.
No problem. Bye bye. Have a good day.